Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. Thank you very much, Mr. Einspruch, to make it possible this series, which continues for many years here and draws a considerable audience, not only from the university but from the community as well. And that's a great service, really, in the cause that's incredibly significant and very important. The story of the Holocaust is a universal story, and it will be, I think, part of our sensibility and for forever. It just stands in the center of Western experiences that were having happened in Europe in the middle of the 20th century, in the context that you know. I'm deeply honored to be here, and I really am very grateful for Professor Oshma's introduction, which is much undeserved. Now, I would like to speak about the reception and of my first book, Neighbors, and then the consequences that flowed from it, and the reactions in Poland that ensued when the other two books on the subject of Polish-Jewish relations during and after the war had been published. It's a little complicated because we already had a meeting with students, some of whom are here in the room earlier, in which we discussed some of these issues, so I apologize in advance.
Okay, oh great. So I apologize in advance if I speak again about some subjects and themes that we have already discussed. The other difficulty in my mind is that I know that many of you have read the book, but I can't assume that everybody did so. So in very few sentences, let me summarize what was in it and what was so novel when it was published in Poland in the year 2000. This was a story on which I came accidentally, and which took me a long time to really fully internalize, of a murder that took place in the summer of 1941, immediately after the beginning of Russo-German hostilities on the territory of central Poland, about 2 weeks after Germans have launched their military assault on the Soviet Union, and which was a period when also mass killings that are such a key issue of this Holocaust phenomenon began. This is when Nazis started killing Jews en masse, really. And in this little town of Jedwabne, a situation mounted, a kind of a tension over a period of time, until on July 10th of 1941, the Jewish population of that little town was murdered. It was a large group of people, 1,600. We don't know exactly the number. Of course, these were times when keeping statistics on this issue was out of the question, of course, but that's the ballpark. And what's so very dramatic about this episode and unexpected in a way to historians of the period was that Germans, who have encouraged local population undoubtedly and allowed it to happen, of course, they were not involved actively in this process. It was the local people, local inhabitants of Jedwabne, killing their neighbors, local inhabitants of Jedwabne, local Jews whom they knew very well, with whom they lived for a very long time, and so forth. And the whole story could be later unearthed, if you will, and reconstructed in some detail, not as much detail as we would like, because there was a trial that was held after the war in 1949 of a number of perpetrators, several of whom got sentenced and some were let go. And essentially the reconstruction of this is based on testimonies that they have given during the investigation. Very sparse testimonies. Nobody was terribly interested in reconstructing, as it were, as part of the trial, the details, but something had to be, and some information was obtained in the course of the investigation. In any case, it allowed to portray and to document what has happened, and there is no question about it, that the local population did this horrendous act. What was quite striking for students of the Holocaust in general about this episode, there were several issues which were unique to it. In the first striking element was the scope of the murder, so early. In other words, that this was not a killing of a dozen, of a few dozen, or even of a few hundred, but of a very substantial number of people in one day, 15 or 1600, we don't know exactly. The second element that was very unusual about this was the characteristic of the deed, which in a way anticipated what later would be happening at the direct instigation of the Nazis, and actually what they will be doing themselves. But at the time they were still, to some extent, restrained in this matter. What was so unusual is that the local population on that day was trying to round up every Jew in town. Women, children, elderly people, everyone. And this was an effort that went on for a couple of hours, so to speak, of ferreting out those who were hiding, because a lot of people were trying to hide, and killing them all. Until the middle of August, at least, it may seem like really parsing to pedantically what was going on, but for historians of the Holocaust this is significant. Until not before the middle of August did the Nazis start killing them all, so to speak. For the first 2 months or so after the beginning of the offensive on the Eastern Front, they were essentially targeting only grown-up males for execution. So in that sense, Jedwabne was bizarre. And finally, the fact that the local Polish population was involved in it in the manner in which it was. Historians of the Holocaust knew for a long time that killings in which local population participated of the Jews took place in the summer and autumn of 1941. But in areas that were removed further east and north, where there was a much more ethnically mixed population, with Poles, Ukrainians, or Lithuanians, and Jews living all together, and that these were acts essentially instigated by the Germans. Nevertheless, the local population with gusto participated in it, but as I said, it involved these sort of multiple ethnic groups and multiple ethnic conflicts, as it were, being exploited here. In this situation, there was what was so striking is that the territory was situated in central Poland, essentially, and that there was no big ethnic mix there. There was just a situation where more or less half of the population of town was Polish and the other half was Jewish. So it was exclusively Polish population that was involved in the murder. All of these elements were new, if you will. Now, when I came upon this documentation, it took me a long time, and I don't want to go into this, but in a way, it's just merely an illustration of the slow process of coming to not so much to terms, but of kind of to cognition of what Holocaust really was. It's such a horrendous moment in European history. It's really, so many things about it are mysterious and difficult to comprehend until today, of course. So it took me some time before I wrote the book. Finally, I did write it. I did publish it in Polish, without really knowing what kind of reaction there will be after it comes out. And interestingly enough, for a good 5 months, or even longer, half a year at least, the book did not draw any response, really, of significance in any case. There were a few articles in the press, many of them very critical, saying that this was just a kind of an anti-Polish conspiracy and nonsense, etc., etc. Historians did not speak up on the issue. Some useful journalistic reporting, however, took place, useful because, first of all, it came from the kind of a Centerright, if you will, a newspaper. And a journalist from that newspaper went to Jedwabne in order to confirm the story, which seemed to him to be outrageous and probably false, and then within just literally minutes in town, he was able to engage local people in conversation, and lo and behold, they all said, yes, of course, this is the locals who have done it, we knew about it, everybody knew about it. He was speaking not exclusively to elderly people who may have witnessed it themselves, but actually to younger Jedwabnians as well, who knew about the story locally simply because it was something that people talked about through the years, of course. So in that sense, there was some background laid, but essentially the whole thing was covered in silence. Until finally, at the end of November or beginning of December, the book came out in May of 2000, an article appeared, 2 articles at the same time, in the main daily newspaper in Poland. One, it was an interview with an important historian of the Second World War, and the other was a piece written by a very important journalist who carried out this interview with a historian. And what the historian said was essentially that he didn't question the veracity of the account. He said that as someone who worked on the subject, on the period, he finds it stunning. This is a story that will push him to reconsider, and generally speaking, one would have to review and think again about what has happened during the Holocaust and how it took place in Poland. But nonetheless, that there was a big issue in his mind yet concerning the German participation, the degree of German participation. It should have been explored in the book much deeper, and he mentioned some specific names of a German officer who was in charge of a unit that operated in the area, and that probably he may have been much more involved and responsible for this killing. And so this was just brought in as a... I replied later to this statement in a article that came out in the same newspaper. There was simultaneously a discussion that was organized in the Polish Academy of Science, where the same historian began this conversation by opening his remarks, essentially repeating what he had stated in this article in the newspaper. I was there, I replied. There was a crowd of historians, and this was a very intense debate. After which the Pandora's box, so to speak, opened up. For the next 7 months, actually, The murder took place, and there was a reason for it, in July of 1941 until July of 2001. That is when the 60th anniversary of the murder would come on the calendar. There was an outpouring of articles, interviews, commentaries of various kinds on television, the radio, and newspapers. I happened to be in Poland at the time on a sabbatical, so I saw it up close, could monitor it every day. I took part to some extent in it, not much. My sense was that I have already spoken, I have given, I had time. My statement was the book, so to speak, and that I should stay away and let the conversation go on between everybody else, so to speak. But on a few occasions I had to intervene. A very bizarre and just totally accidental context of this debate, which gave it a certain quality of suspension, if you will, at the very beginning, had to do with the fact that the documents on which, on the basis of which neighbors were written, in other words, trial transcripts from 1949 that I used, for a period of time were not available for anyone to see. They were not available because the organization which had the custody of these files was shut down, and its files were being in the process of being shipped, so to speak, to a new organization that was created to take custody of all the files having to do with persecution of Polish citizens, whether by Germans or later on by the Stalinist police. It was a new institution that was created called Institute of National Memory that will play an important role in this story. But the bottom line was that when the book came out, and until about, I'd say, March of 2001, nobody could get hold of the materials, and therefore to check, so to speak, on me how truthful and how competent my reading of these documents was. So this was a kind of a big question mark hanging over there. The new archivists were trying to put all the material that they have received on shelves. And finally, in March, this file re-emerged from packing crates. So in any case, what this gave was just a moment of suspension, if you will, and of indeed, I mean, suspension and excitement as to what is there. One of the ways to overcome this inability to get to the archives was to consult with employees of the organization that had previous custody. The organization was called the Main Commission for the Investigation of Hitlerite Crimes. And as part of its activities since the war ended until essentially 2000, when it was merged with the Institute of National Memory, the people who worked in this main commission, on a few occasions, on many occasions actually, but would be called upon to present testimonies in court trials that were taking place at various periods of time. And on some, there was a prosecutor who in the 1960s dealt with these files, with the files from the area of Białystok voivodeship and files of Jedwabne murder as well. It so happened that he was a man who had actually made false testimonies about what was in them. This was a strange period in Polish history of kind of official anti-Semitism being on the rise. I think he was working at the request of German courts, which in 1960s began trials of various German policemen who were implicated in murders east and concentration camp guards and so forth. And among other things, they were requesting materials from Polish authorities. And this man, his name is Monkiewicz, I remember it, he actually provided them with expertise indicating that there were Germans who were implicated in this murder deeply and who were responsible for it. So he was the authority to whom historians could go to at this moment in order to tell them what's in the files, and that would be his testimony. I countered it right away, but of course it wasn't good enough. People had to know what's in it. So the other very interesting element in this period that gave dynamism, if you will, to the debate that just began in December of the year 2000 was the expecting date of publication of the book in English. I made a very deliberate decision to have the book put out in Polish first. My sense was that such a dramatic story should not come upon the Poles from outside. In other words, after first being published in English and then arrive in the form of, questions voiced by journalists or whoever on the basis of an English text. It should come out in Polish, as it did in May. But then the English publication was scheduled for the spring of 2001. And in Poland, this created a tremendous degree of insecurity, if you will, and nervosity. What will happen when the story comes out in English? My position when I've been asked about it was that nothing will happen, of course, in English, or in other words, American Jews in some sense know the story without knowing it literally. It's in their bones. There's the general opinion about what was going on in Poland in the American public eye was that Poles have betrayed Jews on numerous occasions. So it's not going to be a revelation. It's not going to be news. And in a way, I was right. This came out here. All the impact that it made was mediated, so to speak, by the fact how the story was responded to and what influence it had on debates in Poland. Just by itself, it was a big thing. But nevertheless, in the Polish debates, this was something that was very significant, to the extent that the foreign ministry, for example, put together a collection of articles that have appeared in the debate that started, as I told you, in December, a debate that started in print, and translated these articles into English very quickly, so that in March of 2001 there was already a book of articles about the debate in English that Polish embassies have received all over, so that they could distribute them and make them available to interested journalists about how the issue is being handled in Poland. The other element which sort of gave an arc, if you wish, and created a dynamic for the debate was the upcoming anniversary, 60th anniversary of the murder on July 10th of 2001, and the question of what to do with the occasion, with this anniversary, given that in Jedwabne there is a monument which says, a small monument, which says that on July 10th, 1941, 1,600 Jews of this town have been murdered by the Germans. And even though the full-fledged consensus, at least among historians, did not develop yet because research by others had not been done, as to what exactly happened, who exactly is responsible for it, etc., etc. The profession and Polish state authorities, I must say that the president of Poland on this issue was just extremely forthcoming and very wise from the very first time when he had been interviewed about this matter. He would later appear at the ceremonies of 60th anniversary and deliver a very beautiful speech. But even earlier, even before July of 2001, when he was questioned by the press, by journalists, foreign journalists. I think the first interview was carried out actually by an Israeli journalist with him on this issue. He would say, you know, no matter what details we still find out about it. Well, I understand, he says, that more research has to be done, and then we have to just be able to establish all kinds of specific moments, and etc., etc. We already know enough to be convinced and persuaded that something horrendous had taken place, in which Polish citizens were implicated, that they have been involved in the killings of Polish citizens of Jewish extraction, and this is enough for us, for me, he says, as a president, to recognize that, of course, I am not responsible for it, and literally people who are responsible for it are only those who have carried out the killings, but nevertheless, as a community that feels a kind of a historical continuity, we must confront it, and if we want to have a right, in a way, to be proud as Poles of very heroic deeds that have been carried out by our ancestors and take them as a credit to ourselves, we also must be ready, in a metaphysical sense or political sense, however you want to call it, as Poles, to take responsibility for horrendous deeds that had been done by our ancestors, and admit to them and say how horrible it was and how sorry we are. He got sued right away by some right-wing nuts by saying that he abused his power for apologizing in the name of Poland, because they didn't feel themselves that they wanted to extend any apologies. So what was he doing here? It's maybe a funny detail, but actually when he was delivering his speech during the anniversary ceremonies in July in Jedwabne, in July of 2001, he would say in his speech, I am apologizing on behalf of all those Poles who feel that apologies are due. And this was, in a sense, a recognition of a suit that was being still handled in courts, because previously he just simply, in a straightforward way, say, this is a matter on which we should take responsibility and be sorry for it. So, what to do with this monument? Of course, something else should be put there, but what? And how to organize this this celebration, if you wish, or commemoration. First of all, the monument was standing on private property, on the private property of the family who own the barn where Jews had been burned in the conclusion of that day of mayhem at the time in Jedwabne. So this area had to be bought from them first before a new monument could be put there. I mean, there were all kinds of little details which may seem trivial at the time, but time was pressing, and all these things had to be done concretely. And then, of course, a big hullabaloo began as to what should be put on this new monument, what kind of a statement. In the end, the monument is very beautiful, it seems to me. It's symbolic. It doesn't say specifically that local population has killed local Jews, but I have no quarrel with it. You know, monuments are not necessarily the place where all the history of what's being commemorated need to be explained. It has It has a very beautiful poem in Hebrew inscribed, and a statement which does not attribute the murder to Germans, and it's very, architecturally, so to speak, it's a very powerful and successful construction. Now, debates which took place over these 7 months, and I should say one more thing, alongside with debates that went on, and everybody and their uncle, so to speak, participated in them. In other words, not just exclusively historians, but journalists, of course, a lot of people who had something to say on it. I was, at the time, also very concerned about access to the book on the part of as many people as possible, given the visibility of the issue and debates that were taking place in public media. The book came out at a small publishing house run by a friend of mine. Frankly, I was afraid at the time when I wrote it that if I submitted the manuscript to a big publishing house, they will not accept it and they will not publish it, and they may actually do something in order to quash publication by anybody else. So it came out in this small publishing house. Of course, it was not easily available. They didn't have very good distribution. That may have been in part the reason why for several months nothing was going on. But as soon as this public debate began, my sense was that people should have the ability to familiarize themselves with the text and not simply follow the discussion through what participants in the discussion are saying, because it's such an important thing for them just to be able to make up their own mind what has happened. And so the publisher put the text of the book online, so to speak, so that anybody with a computer and this in the year 2000 in Poland, this was not really the same as it is today, of course, when almost everybody is very internet savvy and has computers and so forth. But I must say, and it could be downloaded free of charge. I must say that as I traveled around Poland and met with groups on occasion to discuss this of readers, people would quite often come to me with a printout, especially young people, students, when I met at universities, to sign it and inscribe it for them. So it worked to some extent. The other thing which I've done, and the newspaper agreed to it, the same center right-wing newspaper, and it was important. I prepared, this is not a big book, it's a fairly slender book, but I culled it to about half its size. And one day, this daily newspaper published a center spread in one of its issues, one of its weekend issues, you know, where all the text, as I prepared it, in eliminating some footnotes and this and that, but it was a fair rendition of what was in it, was printed, so that actually a lot of people could get hold of it for just the price of a daily newspaper. So at some point, I felt that comfortable that people actually have access to the text, and that whole discussion is taking place, not filtered through positions of discussants, but the other element, which was extremely important and would generate in a year's time a very significant product, if you will, was the launching by this Institute of National Memory, this new institution that had now custody of the archives. It also had a very broad mandate to investigate the crimes against Polish citizens that were committed, whether during the war or during the Stalinist period, during the communist period that followed the war. And their main interest was in vetting, as it were, the communist period and Stalinist crimes. But as coincidences in life abound always, it turned out that their first task would be to deal with the Jedwabne story. And they have initiated an official investigation of the Jedwabne murder, once again, together, not only an investigation which would lead to kind of a historical documentation and historical reconstruction of what happened, but also they had prosecutorial powers. So there was a prosecutor appointed who could, if he found anyone who was involved in it and who still could be prosecuted, he could issue indictments. This was a kind of a two-track activity. This was very important. This was very important for a variety of reasons. One of the significance of it was that, at some point there will be, if you will, an official with an imprimatur of a state institution, statement or compilation that will establish the facts in some way that would be independent, at least, of my intervention here and my work. And indeed, in the year 2002, two huge volumes came out called Concerning Jedwabne, one of which was the publication of all archival materials that went into the production of the book. In other words, all the transcripts of trials that were held in 1949. And actually, this was augmented by transcripts of trials and reprints of depositions of Jewish witnesses. There were a few who left the story at the Jewish Historical Institute. And also about trials that were held after the war concerning murders that took place in the vicinity of Jedwabne and other places. And in the introduction to this book, as I say, this is published under the official imprint of Institute of National Memory, a Polish state-run organization. In the introduction, the editors of the volume say up front right away that the investigation of the Jedwabne murder led to the finding that similar murders in which local Polish population was involved and where masses of Jews have been killed, or at least large numbers, not individual killings, took place in about 24 small towns in the vicinity of Jedwabne at that time. So Jedwabne is not suddenly a unique phenomenon, and it's a Polish state institution that says so. These volumes were very well done. There were a whole team of historians and lawyers that worked on it. They went to Germany to read carefully through German archives on this issue, in addition to publish trial transcripts. There were lawyers who have done an analysis from a legal point of view of the trials that took place in the late 1940s. The issue being that this was a Stalinist period, and therefore one of the arguments that were phrased by the doubters and the deniers, as it were, of the story was these were Stalinist courts, and of course one cannot have any confidence in what they have produced. These trials were held, people were compelled to give testimonies and so forth by torture or beatings, etc., etc. Again, this had nothing to do with the reality of these particular trials. No, there is no evidence whatsoever that the investigators, who indeed were thugs at the time, and quite a few of the detainees in these trials were beaten up, but this was just a routine of the period, and they were not beaten up to give specific depositions that would implicate other Poles. Nobody was interested in getting this sort of documentation at the time. But again, it's something else for me to say such things. And another for experienced trial lawyers who have read through these transcripts to say the same. The man who did the biggest really legal expertise of these trials is currently the Supreme Court Chief Justice in Poland. So, and by the time he was already a very well-established authority. So, in any case, several things have happened during that time, which are significant here. A very serious and deep involvement of the Polish state in bringing out this matter to kind of shedding clarity on it, and a debate that engaged people from all spectrum of political views, some of whom remained unmoved in their skepticism, others who spoke with deep sadness, but nevertheless recognized that this is what has happened, and that's the story that has now to be incorporated into our understanding of Polish history. To make a long story short, what has then gone on was a new, really, phase in Polish historiography concerning the war. A big taboo has been broken. One could suddenly, one knew and one could say that during the war, Poles, regular Poles, not some criminals exclusively, were implicated in killings or denunciations of Jews. That such an activity was going on as well. And in a short time, in the year 2003, a new unit was established at the Warsaw Academy of Science, the Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw, a research center on the Holocaust, where in time about 10 younger scholars have assembled, and they, since then, they are involved in carrying out research on Holocaust in Poland, which is truly path-breaking and absolutely devoid of respect for any taboos, so to speak. So when my third book, that about which I was talking yesterday here, you saw the photograph displayed here around which this book had been written, came out a year ago. Simultaneously with its publication, there was a publication also of two other monographs written by Polish historians on the subject of Polish-Jewish relations, if you will, in the countryside, and how indeed Polish peasants were involved and implicated in the hunt for Jews and killings of Jews and denunciation of Jews to the Germans. So that, in effect, when discussion of this book again became public, I was not the only person who appeared, who had been given, to whom the journalists turned to give interviews or have a discussion on television and so on and so forth. But there were these two other historians who were homegrown, if you wish, in Poland, and who were involved for quite a while already in investigation of this matter. So, to conclude this quick aperçu, I would say that the change that has taken place, even though until today there is a whole segment of the public opinion that doesn't accept this, and that views any mention of Polish involvement in the persecution of Jews as a conspiracy against Poland and a lie. Nevertheless, the change that has taken place, particularly in the historical profession, is really monumental. Now, has a special significance in my mind, especially for students that are beginning to study history nowadays. This is a staple reading for them, and not some strange, revisionist, bizarre reinterpretation of history. If they want to study the Holocaust and Polish-Jewish relations, they have now the productions, several monographs written by Polish historians that essentially address the issue along the lines which have been opened up by neighbors. So the state of Polish historiography, at least, is completely different than it had been 15 years ago.